the AI. I didn't know this cup existed. Very good.
Show it to the camera.
Very good.
There you go. This is the MLST merch. So you guys need to buy that.
Yeah, should get it.
Today's video is sponsored by Blinkist, the app that gives you key insights from the latest books in just 15 minutes. The Blinkist app enables you to understand the most important things from over 5,500 non-fiction books and podcasts in just 15 minutes. Now, as experts in machine learning, you'll appreciate Blinkist's coverage of books like The Master Algorithm by Pedro Domingos. The book explores how machine learning is allowing computers to solve complex tasks and problems, whether a master algorithm for intelligence could be discovered. Now, for folks interested in machine learning and AI, Blinkist provides a shortcut to discovering the latest technical concepts as explained by leaders in the field like Pedro Domingos. Now, right now, you can get 25% off an annual Blinkist premium subscription, and you can start a free 7-day trial. So check out the link in the description below and explore Blinkist and the Master Algorithm by Pedro Domingos. Also, check out Blinkist Spaces. This feature allows you to create a space with friends or family where you can recommend titles to each other. All members of a shared space can access all titles in the space with or without a Blinkist premium subscription. Anyway, I invite you to give Blinkist a try. Cheers.
Very cool house. Very cool house.
Fantastic.
Very British. I've told Tim, it's like if you imagine the most British neighborhood, Tim lives in it. It's beautiful. Yeah. As you may know, LAION has this petition of essentially building a CERN-like big institution, big thing for producing open source and communal benefits model. And it'd be cool if you also signed that petition, because I think we can use it. It's more and more like compute has been centralized into a few companies, a few cloud providers, and we need something open and something for the common good. And I think it's a cool way forward. By the very least, we should let lawmakers and the public know that something like this is needed, and we can't just leave it up to a few companies. Need to do some brand placement right here. See, this is the Swiss Federation. So,
Oh, amazing. We also have your cup. Why don't you show it up to that camera?
Yes, what's more important, Switzerland or the Yannic Kilcher YouTube channel?
It is my favorite cup.
Yeah.
I drink from that cup frequently.
Excellent.
Yes,
Thanks.
from the cup of Kilcher.
Very pleasant to hear. Thanks.
So, Dr. Kilcher, it's an absolute honor to have you here on MLST. What a journey that we've both been on.
Certainly.
Yes. 2 years ago, we started MLST together. And now, my God, you are easily the number one person in machine learning. And I knew you were going to be from the very beginning, which is why I was so lucky to work with you. But Dr. Lightspeed Kilcher, what drives you?
Well, you just did, but I'm not sure. Whatever is interesting, I feel, or useful for the world. Yeah, that's essentially it. Whatever's fun and useful. There's no bigger ambitions or anything like this. I'm sorry to disappoint.
Well, okay. I mean, many people will be familiar with your amazing YouTube channel. You've probably done more than anybody else to educate experts, but also non-experts in machine learning, because you have this gift, which is to explain things in terms that people can understand. It's a gift that I don't have, because the number one bit of feedback I get is that our content is incoherent and abstract and, inaccessible.
That is a compliment in a way.
It is and it isn't.
You always got to listen for the people who don't complain, right? Like, you never hear those.
Maybe. And it's a fine line. You do get immersed in the research, and there is a lot of technical lingo. And on the one hand, it's helpful to go beyond the superficial. But on the other hand, I think there's a real art to understanding from first principles, what does this thing do?
Yeah, certainly. But I mean, there's different levels. I also think my content isn't extremely accessible by very newcomers to the field, especially my newer content when I do paper reviews, which I haven't done as many in the past because I've maybe we can talk about that later, but been working on this open assistant thing. But at the beginning, I've also explained a lot of stuff very in depth from the very beginning, and now I kind of know my audience, and I know they know certain stuff, so I skip that. So I think there's different levels, and if your audience is very immersed into the field, right, and most are able to follow along the technical lingo, I think that's perfectly fine to be at that level. And then you'll have the odd YouTube comment that says like, well, I don't understand 60% of your words, but yeah, you can't do everything for everyone. That's just that.
Yeah. Well, we've been in the right place at the right time. We were talking about playing with language models years ago.
Yeah.
And I was a bit of a skeptic, and you were less of a skeptic than me, and we'll get into more of that in a little while. But this is a technology which is going to change the world. It's already happening. I'm using GPT-4 literally all day, every day for everything.
Yeah.
So what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy how and we've seen that back then, right? I remember us playing or talking about GPT-2. I remember us playing with the first GPT-3, API. We had some access, right? And we're like, oh, this is so cool. I remember us back then specifically talking about there's going to be the prompt engineer as a job. I remember us saying that specifically, like, in the future there will be a job called prompt engineer. And now there's actually on whatever Monster and so on job listings for prompt engineers and stuff like this. It's crazy, and we've seen this back then, and I think that to everyone who saw GPT-2 even already, it was kind of clear where the journey is going. Nonetheless, I keep continuing to be surprised by how capable these things are and how good. I think the doomsday predictions are maybe a bit much. Like, yes, certainly it's going to change a lot of things, but I think it's going to be in the same way that, for example, the introduction of smartphones changed a lot of things. Like, we used to argue about things in, like, you're in a bar here in Britain, you say a pub, right? You're in a pub having your pint, and you argue about things like how high is Mount Everest, and then one person says, oh, it's this height, and the other person, oh, it's this height, right? You used to have these arguments about facts, and now you're just like, phone, Mount Everest, height, okay, it's this high, cool. And you're having a phone with permanent access to the internet, permanent access to a state-of-the-art camera, and so on, has changed so many things in so many people's lives, yet hardly anyone is now fully unemployed, right? Yes, there may be a few photographers. There may be fewer librarians, right? Because we just don't need libraries as much anymore, and we don't need photographers for as many things, because your phone camera is like, doing a fantastic job. But it's not like the whole world is out of work. Yet the shift was pretty dramatic. In my opinion, the introduction of these language technologies is going to result in a similar shift. Like, yes, it will affect everyone, and yes, it may do so in a drastic way, but most people will continue doing their job, right? With the help of these tools, most people will go on just fine. Like, it's not doom. It's a tool. You can use the tool. It can do cool things. It will adjust. It's fine.
Yeah. So one of the fronts at the moment is the AGI superintelligence discourse, and that's something that I don't subscribe to, obviously.
Yeah.
But we had Connor on, and I've been interested in what people like Robert Miles and Eliezer are talking about. We'll park that just for a minute. But before we get there, there's something really interesting about the reduction of friction, the democratization of this technology. And I can pull up my phone now, I can use Perplexity, and I can find out any information I want to. And even though I could have done that before, could have gone on Google, but it's so much more easy for me using a conversational natural language interface, and the information just comes and I almost don't have to think about it. But therein comes the problem, because it's so virtualized and so accessible now. It has this effect that I don't engage my brain. And I don't want to be hyperbolic. In many ways, I engage my brain more than I did before. So I'm learning about a lot of very technical information that was beyond my horizon before. But there's also lots of things that you previously thought would be very intelligent things that I'm now mindlessly automating.
Yeah. Yes. And that's going to continue, right? It used to be a good skill writing good business email. And now it's like, you don't write a good sounding business email anymore. You just type like with typos and no punctuation at all, and and then you just say like, make this nice. So that's what I said. Like, lots of like skills are going to shift. People are going to use the tool to do different things, right? People don't do long multiplication and long division anymore. We have calculators. So I think that similarly used to be like, ooh, if you could multiply 5-digit numbers in your head or, on paper really quickly, it was like a bit of a sign of intelligence maybe at that time. And then it's just like, here's a calculator. No one does that anymore. So I think it's very similar to things we've seen already. Maybe there's a bigger magnitude or something like this, but yeah, you're gonna work in a bit of a different way.
Yeah, but I mean, there always was this thing called the McCorduck effect, which is that every time we have an achievement in AI, there's a chorus of people who say, oh, that's not really thinking. But now it's gotten to a ridiculous level that nobody could have thought of. I mean, there was the Blake LaION, we can bring that in. And I still don't think these things have consciousness in a meaningful way, but I'm using them every day. And they are doing things which no one could have dreamed of. And I don't just mean objective things. I mean apparently having some kind of a theory of mind or knowing about subjective states, going into the horizon of things that I thought would never happen. And a lot of the critics are dropping like flies. Even J. Mark Bishop, I just got a piece from him the other day. He's the guy who says AI doesn't exist. But these people are now basically saying that, oh, it's still not really AI, but the realization is the schematic, predictable nature of cognition in general.
That's what I've been saying all along. Like, I dare you go back to our first conversations about this, and my position was, are humans really that much more than these things? Like, I think, because people always see this, humans here, right? Language models here, is it now here? Is it now here? Does it finally reach the human? But I think people need to adjust their view of humans, right? To be like, maybe we're not, we think of ourselves as these agents with the internal but you don't know where your thoughts come from. Like, they just pop. You don't know the end of the sentence when you start it. Like, you just kind of have some things in your mind that you kind of want to say, they pop in, and then you just kind of finish the sentence as you go along. You don't plan this out in a logical, mathematical, proof. You just do it. You just make it up as you go. So how, and your thoughts just come to you. So how is this any different from you just being a statistical interpolator of your training data that you've accumulated over your life and that evolution has bestowed upon you, combined with a few goals that also evolution has given you, like survive, thrive, and so on. You have like motivational drive and so on. These things are hard-coded. How is that different from like some auto GPT that has a set of goals at the beginning, just continuously prompts itself to, from its training distribution, bubble up the things that are kind of statistically aligning with what it wants to do, interpolating them. And then there's like, okay, and then there's like a memory module and stuff. but in principle, I don't know whether humans are that much more. So I think that conversation needs to be had, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, throughout the AI research trajectory over the last 50 years, we had NEETs and Scruffies. So the NEETs are the people who have this Chomsky-style, Platonic, rational, systematic view of the world. And unfortunately, there's not much friction between that and the gnarly reality of natural language. And there's a funny expression that, as we get older, we tend to go down the Chomsky hierarchy one model at a time.
Yeah.
And there's an expression as well that all grammars leak. And Chomsky always wanted to have this kind of abstract conception of language. And he never really even thought it would have friction with real language. He just thought that it was something innate, something embedded, which would give us some kind of intuition or explanatory power about what happens with language. But the tide really seems to be turning against him.
Yeah. Okay. I've obviously not been as involved into formal languages, grammar, and so on. I'm not a linguist. I don't claim to be one or have strong opinions on this. I do think that humans go through life being these statistical machines, kind of drawing from their training distribution, if you will, interpolating, having maybe some predictive engine inside their head and so on. Yes, but I think there is a difference. For example, interacting with the world and then lifelong learning is something these models don't do at all yet. So there's still very big qualitative differences. I'm not saying the two are equivalent, right? But I am saying you're capable, for example, of doing logical reasoning, but you have to do it very explicitly in your head. And for 99% of your day, you don't do it. You just go as a statistical machine and you're just that. And when it comes to terms like intelligence and consciousness and so on, it just becomes wordsmithing, right? Because the people who came up with these concepts, it was just clear it applies to humans, right? And then they don't well, okay, is the book conscious or something? It doesn't make sense, right? And now, okay, we have this other thing and we can, but it doesn't make sense because it's just a word game. Like, it's just, okay, how do you define intelligence? Give me a definition. And then I can tell you, does it fall under it or not? But just saying, well, is it intelligent? It's just asking, how do you define the word? And to me, that conversation is just kind of pointless because it's just a definition smithing for words that were never meant to apply to anything except humans, right?
Yeah.
So,
and in a way, this is the Gary Marcus discourse, because the word mimicry comes up all the time from critics. And they always say, but is it really doing X, Y, Z? And it's gotten to the point now with GPT-4 where it's kind of like a distinction without a difference. And Robert Miles said, stop using the word intelligence, use the word capability. And I can get on board with that. But coming back to these critics, as I said, there are three lines of criticism: bias, misinformation, and superintelligence. So why don't we do misinformation first? Now, I've become more concerned about it recently. I was where you are, and just thinking that this is just a load of nonsense. The distribution of misinformation is the important thing. It's not the misinformation itself. And we need to become a digitally literate 21st century society, which means we need to have an inquiring mind, a healthy degree of skepticism. We need to build AI tools to detect AI generated content, all sorts of stuff like that. We're going to change education. But do you think misinformation in of itself is a problem?
I mean, yes, obviously. Your microphone's about to fall off the table.
It's good. It's solid
Okay,
as a
okay.
rock. We've got to get close to these microphones.
Good. Yes, I do think misinformation as such is obviously a problem. It would be better if we lived in a world where there is no misinformation. I have certain troubles with the word itself. Like, what is misinformation? Is a journalist putting like a particular spin on it misinformation? Is it? Because sometimes it's called misinformation. Sometimes it's just called like, well, technically they didn't say anything wrong. They just kind of left out pointed out in a creative way certain aspects of a story, right? You can do misinformation. You can just straight up lie. It's so there's this whole aspect of, and obviously I'm worried about that, but I think, right, you're able to write the fake news story yourself, right? You're able to go to a low wage country, have tons of humans write fake news for you. When we say the important thing is the distribution, we mean the distribution, not in the statistical sense, we mean the distribution of actually getting it to people, right? Getting it in front of people, having people see it and having, people consume it. That doesn't change. And you can get 200 humans to write fake news stories for you if you want that right now. It's not going to cost you that much, right? And so I don't see all the problems associated with the misinformation. They still exist, whether we have these models or not. What it does is it gets a bit cheaper to produce them. Yes, at scale. That it does. But the problem is inherent. It doesn't go away. And we'll have to get used to a world where more stuff is, let's say, potentially generated, right? Same with images. You and I grew up in a world of where we saw a photograph of something, right? And it looked like a photograph. We could be pretty sure it's real, right? If it's like a drawing, sure, we know, but if it's like a photograph, we're like, this is a photograph, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the people who grow up today, to them, it will be absolutely clear. If they see a photograph, this is no indication of whether the thing that it shows ever happened or not. Like, this is so inherent in those people. Like, to you and me, it's inherent that if someone writes me an email from Nigeria and that I've inherited a fortune, that is maybe not, just because it's written, it's maybe not true. And there is an entire generation above us who grew up in a world where whenever something was written, it was probably true because someone had to take the time, right? And, so anything that's written is, probably solid. You and I, we grew up in a world of, to us, there needs to be like verifiable, this is real, until we believe it. And to the next generation, they need to do the same thing for pictures, for any sort of content. We've had this before, and it needs a shift along with the capabilities of these models. Just needs a shift of, maybe rethinking. Maybe if we see something, being like, this could be generated. Does that matter for whether it's fake or not? Like whether it lies or not, that it's generated?
Well, two things on that. So first of all, with Chomsky being a rationalist, the rationalists are most known for, they hate probability. And the reason they hate probability is because you can't, science is about deduction, he would say. You can't generate new facts and new knowledge in the domain of uncertainty. So he would say, we don't know that smoking causes cancer because it's one of these probabilistic causing models, which means you manipulate some variables and the probabilities go up or down. So we think it causes cancer. It probably does. But there's also this notion of the kind of the polarization of power in our society, which is to say, the internet's been great. Anyone can start a blog and become established, and people will listen to what they say. And it had this great democratizing effect. And now, just like with AI art, information is losing all of its value because it can be generated. And that means the authority function is going to be driven much more by centralizing forces.
Nah.
No?
No,
Can you just point that green light away from you, by the way? It's you look a bit too green.
I look a bit too green.
You look great now.
No. Okay, I see the problem if it's if everyone comes to depend on OpenAI or so, right? For we had similar problems, let's say, like if you're like blocked from Twitter, to some people it's like actual damage, right? So you're very reliant on this one entity of doing, the good thing and the right thing. Is like a private entity. So that I can totally see concerns around that. But we've had revolutions in technology before that affected, for example, art heavily. Photoshop or something. Cameras as such, right? Like who needs a person who comes to draw your family portrait anymore? Now we have a camera. Art isn't going away. The particular mechanical form of some art might go away. For example, I can totally see that the job of an illustrator will decrease in the future because we have good models that do that. But that's just the mechanics of expressing an artistic idea. I believe with more possibilities, the amount of art probably will increase. How many people didn't get into visual art because they just didn't have the skill to either be good at Photoshop or be good at actually drawing. Certainly if you watch my video, certainly I am terrible at visual output, like really manipulating with my hands things so they look good. I'm really bad at it. And now I have these new tools and I'm able to describe what I want, right? I'm able to, or with, I don't know if you've seen these runway ML or tools like this, right? I can modify video in ways that and just the amount of expressive power I have through that, we're only scratching the surface. And control net, things like this, it's insane. And so to an actual artist, right, who's not locked into a particular medium or a particular mechanical expression, this has got to be like so cool, right? It's like all these new possibilities. So I'm not on board with it's gonna make art obsolete or so.
Okay, but we live in a world of, I mean, we have information workers, which is a whole class of people that have been invented in the last 30 years or so, and they prided themselves on skill. And some people will be displaced because their market skill can now be automated. And I've noticed now that if you use GPT-4 to generate code or generate the script for a YouTube video or whatever it is, people just say, "Oh, did you use GPT-4 to generate that?" So there's this question of where is the value? And if it was so easily automated, maybe it wasn't that valuable anyway. But also the value must be your original intention, right? Your creativity, the way you've driven it. And you still need to be creative to drive it to do something which doesn't look schematic. If you just get GPT-4 to generate a video script, it's dog shit, right? It's rubbish. So there's still a lot of skill there, but it's just going to change everything.
It's how you use the tool, right? It's a tool and you can use it. And yes, some of the work previously, it's the same with like engineering, right? How much of actual engineering, building stuff physically or software is obsolete because we have better tools, right? Like if you use Rust as a language, you're not going to have any of the pointer, do I deallocate my stuff? You're not going to have it from if you used to C or C++, or you're going to have it less. Like you'll get yourself into situation. But with newer compilers, newer linters, you're not going to have a lot of the crap that engineers of the past have had to deal with, and where it would have required solid engineering skill, where you would say, yes, that's a good engineer. That engineer can do XYZ. That is now completely automated. We've all accepting that. Also, the mechanical stuff, building, cool. We now have 3D printers, right? You just go like, I want a thing that looks like this, go print. You don't need someone anymore to build a mold for it and then something. So, and I don't see the whole world being unemployed, right? People just shift, and yeah, maybe with the, oh, did you generate this? It's kind of like auto-tune in singing, right? It's like, oh, did you use auto-tune for that, right? You need that. But yeah, still, it's how you use the tool. You're getting it to do something. It has almost infinite possibility, right? Like the internet itself, but even like something like Photoshop itself, very narrow domain, already has infinite possibilities to create things, and we find the people remarkable who can use such a tool really well. So I think no one should, out of pride, not use whatever tool is available for to achieve a good thing. And at the same time, if it's not appropriate, then I think humans are still very capable of doing stuff themselves. So.
Interesting. Okay, well, we'll get on to autonomy and bias. So this is one of the arguments of this all-encompassing infosphere. It erodes our autonomy. We become automatons. We don't think for ourselves anymore. And the implication is that in our current pluralistic society, we have lots of diversity. We have lots of people saying, oh, I don't think it's a good idea to do that. And I guess they're painting a picture that now we're controlled by these monolithic large language models. And that's not really true, is it? Because it's already becoming democratized to the point where Dr. Kilcher here has created Open Assistant, and you can run them on your computer. Soon you'll be able to run them on your phone.
You need a big computer.
And but even if they do erode, you need a big one. You need a big. But you know, even if they do erode your autonomy, as we've just been describing, there's still an awful lot of artistic freedom in how you drive them. And so, do you really buy the argument that it will, first of all, kind of predetermine the direction of progress, and also stop us from progressing where people might want us to?
Yeah, no way. I mean, I get the point that, for example, since content by these models tends to be, I mean, there is an argument to be made that every content ever is a regurgitation of the past arranged in slightly different way. With these models in their current form, it's like more of that, right? If I use Copilot, I'll get more of like the standard code on GitHub and less of like the more creative kind of code things. So I can definitely see that there might be a bit of a stagnation in terms of just random new things springing up, because people use these things heavily biased towards like majority distributions of the past, not even, representing. I think we've seen that, especially when we talk to people like Sarah Hooker or so, right? That there seems to be a concentration to things that are more like the majority, maybe a bit more represented than outliers, especially once you go pruning these models and making them faster and so on. So I see maybe there is a bit of a dip in random new things happening. I think with more capabilities of these models that might be overcome, or go into a different direction where we say, yes, okay, we sample a bit differently, but also we can put much more effort into selecting what we sampled, right? So it's like before, the individual human wasn't very diverse as such. You had very much your style and you did it that way, right? When you wrote a loop, you had your way of writing a loop that you were comfortable with, and the other person had the other way. And diversity came from the fact that humans individually branched out, and then that kind of got selected by society. Now it might be more that I can sample much more. You may have noticed that, right? If you use GPT-4 for writing, you can say, a bit different, give me a bit different, right? You can kind of sample from that human society as one, right? Individually, and then you make the selection of it. And maybe now it's much more this mode where all the humans kind of sample from a more similar distribution, which is broader in itself, rather than the humans themselves being the points of the distribution. I don't think it's going to have like a giant effect on our autonomy. Like the saying, like the sheeple meme has been so alive for long. Like, well, people are just sheeple, they just follow whatever the elite says. And so like there's this scene from Monty Python where it's like, no, you are all individuals. And then they all say, we are all individuals. You know, that one?
Yeah, I've seen
it's
that many times,
from what's the where they parody like Jesus Christ. No.
Yeah, I can't
Life of
remember
Brian.
Life of Brian,
yeah. I think the meme has been around for long, and I can see that same thing might appear because these models are dominant and essentially people grab their opinions from that, but it's always been the case that they grab their opinions from somewhere.
Yeah, I can see this both ways, because you could argue that it's a form of gatekeeping and paternalism, which is that you have a clerical class who say, oh, we know what's good for you. That's a concern. But I also do believe that society is changing fast. I mean, like the last 10 years have been defined by trans rights, for example. And this is something which people weren't really thinking about. You know, it's the same thing with the gay rights in the 1960s. And right now, the language models will be slowing down the progress of trans people who suffer violence and discrimination. And
Yeah, that's what I mean, right?
Yeah.
In that we sample more from, it's more of a sampling from the majority distribution of the past, right? Which will maybe slow down sort of societal progress a little bit, but I don't think these things are going to have such a massive impact like that. I think humans will still be able to say, hey, you know, what about these people and their rights, and can we advocate for that? And then they may even use such models to advocate for that. If these models are powerful enough, right, which they are getting more powerful by the day, they will be more and more capable of, for example, producing good arguments in favor of a new movement, right? So even if you have a new movement, a new opinion that has not been there before in society, it's quite likely that you could use these things to help you in some way. Maybe not in the most optimal way, because in the recent past, the majority distribution has been different, but they're still like, it's not like they always output the same thing, right? They're still immensely powerful. So yeah, I don't think it's going to stop societal progress as such.
And do you see a future where we see more personalized models? So certain communities could build models which are sampled on material that they believe in.
Yeah, do you want that? Mix. Like, do you actually think that's how, like, because the meme is actually, there's like 2 or 3 main opinion makers and everyone just grabs their opinions from those, right? Do people even, like, people think they're much more individual than they actually are. That's why recommender systems work, right? Because, you like romantic comedies and you like horror films, but not too much horror, like just a little bit. So you get a little bit like, ooh, right? It's like, oh, you're so unique, right?
Yeah.
It's not the case. You're so similar to so many humans in pretty much anything. And then the overall combination of all of these things is then what makes the you individually, right? Like the real individual of you. But whether we need to personalize that much, I'm not so sure. Like, do you get bothered by the fact that Wikipedia isn't personalized?
No.
You see? So
I like it.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we'll see more personalization. We'll see more communities having their own models, whether that's just by fine-tuning one central model or really fundamentally building up their own. And there one could talk whether that's going to be dangerous in terms of, there's going to be right-wing GPT and left-wing GPT, right? And they are such that even the fundamental structure of the model is like different, right? Like the fundamental worldview and facts and knowledge is different. Then maybe it gets a bit tricky.
Well, I mean, a couple of things there. I mean, first of all, one of the reasons for the success of Facebook is these echo chambers, because people actually don't like information like on Wikipedia. They like information that supports their worldview. And I don't just mean from a subjective information point of view, but also they like all of the flair and charisma that we use in language. They hate text generated by GPT. I'm speaking with the Perplexity CEO later, and he kind of said to me, well, we're really trying to build objective factual information.
Yeah.
And then like the next step was, but we might also generate opinionated information, and you know, you kind of go down, because it's about what people want to consume. Yeah. And the other thing is, if you accept that we do live in this chaotic dynamical system, there is some truth to this idea. You know, psychologists call this social proof, which is that we don't think for ourselves, we look at the decisions of others, and if we think those decisions have authority and everyone else is doing it, then we'll just believe the same thing. So
they're alive. So that's pretty good strategy, no? Like, like they're still like, that's the, I guess that's the case for conservatism in the abstract. It's like, well, all our ancestors have done it this way, and so they're still alive, right? And then other people say, well, but the world is changing, right? So that's no longer going to work. It's always the same like arguments, right? And it's like somewhere in the middle, right?
Okay. Well, what about superintelligence? So the third form of AI risk is this, and there was the moratorium, which was signed by Bengio, Eliezer, Gary Marcus, Elon Musk, in many cases by people who just want to catch up and build their own systems like EMAD, but in some cases people who genuinely think that there is an existential risk of AI. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, it's not that bad that OpenAI is kind of ahead. It's just from like Open Assistant, I can tell you it's 10 times easier to build something that you know must work somehow, right? Like it's 10 times harder to be OpenAI and be like, how about we invest $1 billion into doing this, right? That no one has ever done before. Like we kind of think it's going to work out. Like that's going to be a lot more stressful than us who just like, that seems to work. Let's just kind of do the same, right? And sure, we have to figure out a bunch of things along the way because they don't tell everything, but still, it's so much easier because you know it has to work somehow, right? And you can sort of make mental calculations of, okay, how much data they probably had as an upper bound, right? And how big the model probably is given how fast it can respond. You can do all of these things. So it's so much easier to be like the second one to do something than the first. So I'm not sure it's actually in the benefit of people to catch up, quote unquote, rather than let OpenAI sprint ahead, burn 10 times as much money, and then we just copy it for cheap, essentially. I'm not I don't want to, downplay the achievement of people who build big things, but there is a considerable cost of being the pioneers and the first one of doing it. But yeah, the moratorium, I don't know what to think of that. That was kind of, I'm not sure, I'm always trying to make the best case for something like this, right? The best case is something like nuclear weapons, for example. There is an actual moratorium on researching those, right? You can't just have your nuke in the garden here or your nuke lab. I guess, like, didn't the high schooler at some point have like a nuclear reactor in the shed in his, I think it was crazy. But but you can't, right? You're not allowed to. The AI models, the current one and the ones we're going to have in the near and midterm future, distinctly do not fall in the same category as like nuclear weapons. Distinctly not, in so many ways, right? That I'm very much in the camp of no, these certainly shouldn't be treated the same way. I see dangers, certainly with AI technology, with the research getting ever more advanced, all of that, but very distinct from nuclear. That's just the case I'm trying to make, is like, okay, there are examples where we say, look, researching this should be stopped, not performed by citizen scientists, regulated and handled with extreme care, right? Mm-hmm. It exists. So in my mind, I can say, okay, at least the idea of proposing something like this isn't out of this world. But as I said, I'm absolutely not on board with, let's stop. What is it doing? Is doing nothing, right? It's. Do you really think people are going to stop matrix multiplications because it's like, don't you propagate that? Don't you calculate those gradients? No. Oh, don't you dare do another batch? Like what? What? How? No. It's just not going to happen. People are not going to. The other actors in the world are not going to keep to it. It achieves literally nothing. So I don't get it. And I think the best way of mitigating the potential dangers of the technology, which I see much more in humans use it to do things, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than it's gonna run off and be paperclip factory. I think the best way of mitigating that is to get it to everyone as much as possible, as fast as possible, with as much transparency and insight as possible, so people can see what's happening, they can adjust it, they can figure it out. Just take the difference between like DALL-E 2 and like stable diffusion, right? You DALL-E 2, we give access, you're on the wait list, and then you may use our text interface, but we'll change your prompt a bit to make sure, right? And certainly you cannot access the model, certainly you cannot change anything, certainly you cannot train it yourself or build apps on top of it as you want. Like, none of that. We decide what features there are. Stable diffusion, like in an objective sense, I'm not sure if that's still true for the newer versions. They look amazing, right? But in its original sense, weaker than DALL-E 2, right? Model objectively weaker. However, giving it just to people is such an explosion of creativity, such an explosion of understanding of how to make it better, how to make it do things, how to make it run everywhere, how to, turn up and down its safety. So, I mean, I think the it's much more helpful if you distribute it, if you let people do things with it. And I think that leads to much more understanding and much more like of an awareness in society, and much, much more understanding of how to mitigate anything that like bad actors could do with the technology. Because, you think they're not capable of building something like this just because OpenAI doesn't give them access.
Yeah. I mean, they say that the blast radius is so high. It's an intellectually difficult problem because the probability is low, but the magnitude of the impact is high. And they also say that it's a bit like firing off an explosion, that you only get one chance and then the damage is done.
Yeah, but what are they afraid of specifically? Like, well, I've stopped reading after the.
I mean, their main thesis is that it's like an intellectual Santa Claus machine, and it will start, going down your chimney, and it will, go and get its DNA printed, and it will just replicate itself everywhere. It'd be impossible to turn. I mean, I don't believe in that. But the thing is, like, first of all, just taking a step back, even OpenAI, whether they're saying this just to throw people off, it must have really affected them that there's big 6-month moratorium, because Sam Altman has now said, we're going to just start doing little updates. And that's because they don't want to have a big update because there's going to be another moratorium. And they've also said that, actually, we figured out that model parameters are a bit like megahertz on a CPU. Doesn't really matter that much. And that Instruct paper said that a model 100 times smaller worked better than GPT-3 with the human preference training.
I don't believe any scientific claims out of OpenAI, just on the basis of they're now a business and they have business interests, and so I'm not going to believe any of these claims, right? This is now has to be classified, and I'm not saying that in a derogatory sense or anything like this, but this has to be classified as marketing speech, right? Mm-hmm. Their newest paper was just a marketing paper, right, about GPT-4. So it's just discard whatever comes out of there. Like, are they training GPT-5? There's OpenAI says they're not training GPT. Well, who cares how they call it, right? All they're saying is like what you just said. We'll not do like a big, here is GPT-5. We'll do the same thing, but we'll just say GPT-4 version 1.1, 1.2, and so on. So, it's pointless to talk. It's pointless to try to deduce from that much of what's actually happening. And the other thing is, with really this fear of it's going to become a paperclip machine and so on. Okay, I could be totally wrong, and if you're watching this in the future and you're being turned into a paperclip right now, I deeply apologize. Okay, I deeply apologize for not being more aware of this, but I just don't see it happening. At some point it becomes a religion. Okay, you say, well, we could shut it off, and they were like, no, it's so smart. It can convince you to not shut it off. And I can see for some systems it actually tricky. Like, we couldn't shut off Google. Like, as a search engine organization, human machine hybrid, mm-hmm. whatever Google is, we can't shut it off. Right? the world would be in trouble if Google were to be shut off, right? All of Google, like Gmail, Calendar, search, all the APIs and so on. Trouble. The 8888 DNS server, terrible. Like, so I can see some, but it's like, well, it's so smart. It could convince you to not shut it off. And you're like, well, it's going to eventually run out of like electricity. Well, it's so smart. It can figure out a way to, convince humans via social media influence, right? It can rally up humans to bring it more coal. Because of it creates political divisions. Like, well, okay, eventually it's going to run out of coal. It is so smart. It can, find out a new way of creating. It can probably solve fission and create new energy, and it can replicate itself. And at some point, it's like so smart. It can break the speed of light, and at the same time, like I don't know, it can, it can do it. Yeah. At some point, it's just God. Like you just talk about, it's so pointless because any rational argument you try to make, it's just like, no, it's so smart. It can overcome that. So at what point is it like pointless?
Well, it's funny you say it's a bit like God because there is...
It's like a bit of a, like you said before, like a bit of a cult, right? Yeah. Which I see the members acting, but it's also a religion in a technical sense, in that there is this being, and the being has a power. And the power is just, it can just do anything, right? And it's just, well, whatever the being can, and I don't have to explain it to you because obviously you're too dumb, because a you couldn't understand because it's so intelligent and you're just a human. So I don't even need to explain to you how the being it's going to use its superpower to achieve the super things. And it's God in a technical sense. It's like, like God can do anything. How? Well, he's just omnipotent, right? Like, it's the only thing the superintelligence doesn't have is like omnibenevolence, right? So it can actually be evil, and that's the fear.
But to try and steel man a tiny bit, we don't understand how GPT-4 works. There's very clever people, and these people are very clever. Doing mechanistic interpretability and figuring out what circuits do and so on. And it's just more complicated than you would ever believe. And one interesting thing is Connor didn't want to talk about what things would lead to runaway superintelligence. So this idea of recursive superintelligence is that if certain configurations of models like this are found, then they will just get better and better. And some people have pointed at recursivity, reflexivity. There's that reflection paper that just came out. And at the moment, there are so many limiting factors, right? Just the compute. Every time I run inference on GPT, it takes minutes. But I don't really understand sometimes what it creates. And hypothetically, if you did let GPT recursively call itself thousands of times, do you think that it could produce something which we wouldn't understand that could resemble superintelligent?
Yes and no. I'm very sure what it could do is something that's at certain tasks distinctively better than humans, and be doing that in a way in which we cannot understand. And I think a bit of an insight into that is the like recent advances into Go engines and chess engines as well. Like chess engines were always better than humans for the last 20 years or so, but at least the older ones, the kind of deep Bluian ones, you could sort of understand because they had some features, right? And they did their computations, and you could maybe try to but now if it's just a big neural network, it's like we've come from really being engineers to a bit being biologists, right? There's this thing, and we now poke it here and poke it there and see how it reacts, and we don't really understand every computation anymore or what it's doing. So like AlphaGo, or what are the newest, like Alpha 0, Mu 0, Super Plus Plus, and so on. They're playing Go and chess at levels beyond any human, right? Yeah. And if we try to understand why they're doing a certain move, very often, I mean, please correct me if you're a Go grandmaster, but very often we can try to understand, right? But sometimes we won't. Sometimes it's just like, well, it just determines that it's a very good move, and the thing always wins. So we just assume it's like a good move, right? We don't understand. So I think in that sense, we already have such systems in a microcosm. I totally believe that we can create such systems that in certain tasks are better than humans, and better in a way in which we have trouble sort of following its steps. I don't think that's going to lead to God, right? To this thing where it's like, ooh, it's encompassing everything, it does everything. Because yeah, we've been using computers to design new computers for ages now. Like all the circuit plans and so on, they're optimized by computers, optimizing new computers. There's a human in the loop who does I take the blueprint, I bring it to the factory, but essentially it's it's computers designing new computers. And we've seen insane amounts of progress in hardware, but not a super godlike, because at some point there's a limiting factor. If it's quantum physics, if it's the availability of hardware, if it's the availability of power to power the factories, there are so many limiting factors. So I don't believe this runaway effect.
But the Go example is interesting because, as you say, it performs orders of magnitude better than any human. And the way the skill ranking works is between each level, person from level 7 will beat person from level 6 95% of the time. And there's about 10 of those. So there's a huge difference. And I can see how you could extrapolate from that into the real world. But the real world is different. First of all, it's exponentially bigger. And people assume that Go-like systematization exists in the real world, right? And it's just trajectories of actions and tasks and capabilities. And the real world isn't really like that.
Yeah, in a way it is, and in a way it isn't, right? So yeah, that's an additional trouble these things are going to find themselves be having. And yeah, so I'm not on board with the whole superintelligence runaway. I can definitely see it in some parts, and we should pay attention and all of that, but in like the general all-encompassing sense, I don't think I'm on board.
Cool. Okay, folks, this is just a reminder that you can get 25% off an annual subscription, and you can start a 7-day trial of Blinkist. Check out the link in the description. Cheers.